Hey there guys, so I'm back with another movie review. Now, those of you who have been following my movie review series, and I'll leave a link to the playlist in the description section of all my movie review videos, those of you who are following it will know that so far I've only really been reviewing recent movies, but since I've been watching a whole lot of old action movies and action movies that I liked as I was growing up and stuff like that, I figured I'd do a more of a retro review every now and then. This won't be a regular thing on my channel, just something I do every now and then. I might review an old movie or a movie from my childhood or something like that. So I figured since I've been talking about mostly action movies, I mean every video that I've done so far that's a movie review has been an action movie. So I figured I'd talk about an older action movie, and this movie, Out for Justice, which came out in 1991, which in my opinion, and I know some of you guys may disagree, this is one of the most underrated and underappreciated action movies of all time. In case you can't tell already, I love this movie. I absolutely love this movie. I've watched this movie a few times now. It's absolutely fantastic, and one of the main reasons why I chose this movie to review is because, in my personal opinion, this movie is the perfect example of how to do an action movie. You know, it is beautifully directed. The choreography and the stunts and the fight scenes are realistic. They're gritty. They're violent. But at the same time, they're also believable. And that's something I love about this movie, is how believable the whole thing is. Now, Out for Justice was directed by Dwight H. Little, and stars Steven Seagal as a tough, veteran, brutal Brooklyn police officer, or Brooklyn detective who is adept in martial arts. And long story short, Steven Seagal's partner is gunned down in the middle of the streets by a drug-addicted, psychotic mob enforcer who has just gone off the rails and is, causing a lot of problems in his community, in his old neighborhood. And it's a guy that Steven Seagal and his partner grew up with, and for some unknown reason, this guy just goes up to Steven Seagal's partner in the middle of the street and guns him down in front of hundreds of witnesses and in front of his wife and kid. So naturally, that sends Steven Seagal, who's this guy's partner and best friend, on a revenge mission, or a mission to find justice. And that goes to show you that the title of this movie, it pretty much does what it says on the tin. It's Out for Justice, and that's exactly what this movie is. Steven Seagal is out for justice. He's looking to bring this guy down. Now, what I absolutely love about this movie is how brilliantly paced it is. First of all, it gets right into the action. Okay, the very first scene of the movie shows you Steven Seagal kicking the ass of some pimp who is slapping up some woman who works for him, and then obviously threatens to kill Steven Seagal's family, so he ends up going apeshit and beating the shit out of the guy. And it just goes to show you how, this is a guy who's not to be messed with. Now, one of the things this movie absolutely had to get right, otherwise it would have been a complete flop, is the action sequences. Now, I talked about in some of my recent reviews how action sequences nowadays are just complete crap most of the time. I mean, the Black Panther movie that came out recently, Taken 3, a lot of these other action movies that are, trying to cut corners by adding things like shaky cam, close-up shots so you can barely see what's going on, multiple camera angles for the same sequence, and, they just make it nauseating. And it's just, I really, when I go to the cinema nowadays to see an action movie, a lot of the time I just wonder why I bother, because it's just the same crap over and over. But in this movie, there is no CGI, there is no shaky cam, there are no close-ups every 2 seconds, there's no multiple camera shots to show you the same sequence. There's none of that stuff in this movie. There's lots of wide shots, there's lots of prosthetic effects, like there's a scene where Steven Seagal hits a guy with a meat cleaver and just cleaves his hand to the wall, and it looks realistic as fuck. I'm seeing like even the effects, like the blood and the hand being stuck to the wall and everything from the guy's reaction, it just looks real. There's also a scene where he he blows a guy's leg off with a shotgun, man, and it's realistic and it's brutal and it's really, really well done, and it's not an obvious mannequin. It actually does look like this guy's had his leg blown off, and it's fun to watch, and it's kind of brutal, but at the same time there's a bit of slapstick humor there with the guys, that the way that the guys behave. And the fight scenes in this movie, you know, they're like I said, they're realistic. They flow together really well. Steven Seagal, you know, does his trademark Aikido takedowns. You know, when guys run at him with knives and shit like that, he's able to disarm them. You know, he even uses the environment to his advantage. There's a scene earlier in the movie where you see a couple of staffs in Steven Seagal's house, so that shows you that he's had a lot of training using a staff, which they do in Aikido. And there's a scene where he's in a bar and he picks up a pool cue and uses that like a staff, and you know, just expert martial arts skills, and he even is able to take on multiple guys at once because he's so adept at, you know, controlling the momentum of his opponents. And that, of course, is what Aikido is all about. If you guys have ever studied Aikido, it's about if somebody's, you know, coming at you in a forward motion, who's about to stab you, or who's swinging a punch at you, it's about taking that person's forward momentum and putting them on the ground, basically. And he does that really well in this movie, and I think it's and also Steven Seagal, of course, being a big guy, 6'5", well over 200 pounds. You know, he's able to throw these guys around like rag dolls, and it's really, really well done. And he doesn't even need a stunt double most of the time because he obviously sticks to what he knows. You know, there's no wire work in this movie. There's no him doing like triple backward flips and, you know, jumping over guys' heads and fucking, you know, all that stupid shit you see in a lot of recent movies, even a lot of recent Steven Seagal movies. I mean, a lot of his recent movies have just been straight up garbage. I mean, I wouldn't even bother watching them, but this is back when he was at his prime and he actually was working with fairly competent directors. So I like the action in this movie. It was brilliant. The plot of the movie's simple, and that's another thing I like about this movie, okay, because this is an action, you know, it's a somewhat cheesy action flick with a lot of gore, so it doesn't really need a tremendously deep plot, but there is a surprising amount of character development in this movie, and that's something that I was very impressed with, because you do find yourself genuinely caring about the character. And I somewhat would compare this movie to a more recent one. I would compare it to Brawl in Cell Block 99, which was a movie that came out late last year, which I also reviewed on my channel, which you can check out in the playlist of my movie reviews. That was a fantastic movie. I would say that I like this movie a little bit more than Brawl in Cell Block 99, but I like them both for the same reasons, in the fact that the action sequences were not nauseating, they didn't use any CGI whatsoever. You know, there wasn't any like obvious, you know, clear mannequins and stuff like that, and clear stunt doubles. The actors in these movies worked within themselves. You know, Steven Seagal works within what he knows. He didn't pretend to be something different. You know, he didn't go into this movie pretending to be, you know, Jet Li, Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, you know, super duper kung fu master. No, he was a big guy, a hard guy who knew a bit of martial arts and who could use his size to his advantage. And that's what I like about this movie. It was realistic that way. The villain in this movie, another reason why I love this movie, the villain, William Forsythe, who plays Richie Madano, who's the mob enforcer who obviously grew up with Steven Seagal and Steven Seagal's partner, and ultimately guns down Steven Seagal's partner in the beginning, which causes this whole kerfuffle. He was fantastic in the movie. Really, really intimidating, really psychotic. The scenes where he just guns people down for no reason, like he cuts somebody off in traffic and they shout, "What are you doing?" and he gets out of the car and just pops them. I mean, that's the kind of character this is. It's just a sociopath, a guy that's just bloodthirsty and just doesn't give a fuck. Like, even when the mob who he's supposed to be working for is after his ass and trying to get rid of him because he's bringing too much attention to their businesses and whatnot, he just doesn't care. It's just like the guy has a death wish, and his mind and his morals and his conscience have been so destroyed by drug use and by the things that he's seen growing up, and just by his own bloodlust. And you can tell that this is a character who is deeply disturbed. He's a sexual deviant. You know, he's a real control freak. Like you know, there's a plot twist later on in the movie which I won't spoil, but that plot twist kind of exposes just how much of a control freak this character is. And he was played brilliantly by William Forsythe, and he was a really, really memorable villain. And I think that as a villain, this guy probably stands out a heck of a lot more than any of the other villains in any other Steven Seagal movie. I mean, look, Steven Seagal, he's been in a lot of bad movies, a lot of really forgettable movies, particularly his recent work, which was just complete trash. But this movie, he had a good supporting cast. Okay, his partner in the beginning does a good job. The mob that he associates with, all the other people that he comes across in this movie, they're all believable and they're all fairly decent actors, and they all do a good job. And Steven Seagal himself, I know he has the funny accent. I know, I got a few laughs in this movie with Steven Seagal's Italian accent. I thought it was pretty funny, but I didn't think it was too bad. I mean, it was somewhat believable. I mean, it wasn't cringe-worthingly bad like some of his more recent films where he tries to do a Russian accent and stuff like that, and he just fails badly. In this movie, it was somewhat believable, the accent. So yeah, this is a beautifully directed movie. The soundtrack, I have to talk about the soundtrack. Absolutely brilliant. They really nailed the whole feel of this movie, and you can tell it's a real badass 90s action flick with the soundtrack that they used. And it just, I don't really want to get too much into that because a soundtrack is a soundtrack, but a soundtrack is important with whether it's a video game or whether it's a movie, because it sets the atmosphere, and I really like it when they have a really good score that goes with the movie. It really helps. This is a great movie. I don't really know what else to say. I don't really have any criticisms for this movie, and that's rare for me to say that because, whereas Brawl in Cell Block 99 was almost perfect, I had a couple of criticisms for it because the villain, although the villains in that movie were just not memorable, and I said that in my review for that movie, even though I gave that movie a solid 8 out of 10, and I thought it was a great movie, one of the best movies of last year. I don't really think that the villains in that movie were very believable. I don't think that they were very memorable, so I just didn't really, I didn't really care for those characters. But in this movie, the villain played by William Forsythe is fantastic. He really is fantastic, and Steven Seagal's performance in this movie as the lead role, what's interesting to me about it is a few times in this movie, and this might sound like a criticism, but it's not a criticism because I understand it in the context of the story. A few times in this movie, Steven Seagal will come across as a complete asshole. Like he pushes people around, he throws them into fucking phone boxes. Like that. This is one guy, he just goes up to the guy, grabs him by the throat for no reason, and throws him into a fucking phone box. And it's from the scene in the bar. And I think that, he's in this bar and he's asking all these people, he's like, anybody seen Richie? Anybody seen Richie? And in this funny Italian accent, and he's trying to get answers out of these guys because these guys know this Richie character and they know where he is and they know what he's up to, but nobody wants to grass him in. Nobody wants to open their mouth. It's like they've all got memory loss, and they just don't want to get involved. And obviously Steven Seagal's hurt. His character's hurt. He's pissed off. He's depressed, and he's really out for vengeance on because of what happened to his partner. So he's throwing these guys around, and he's challenging all these guys to a fight. He's fucking these guys up in a bar, and he comes across as a bit of a bully in that scene. But what's good about it and what I like about it is it shows how emotional his character was, and it shows how much he cared for his partner and how emotionally he invested he was in this case. And it actually did give his character some substance, and it actually did make me care for the character. So I really loved Steven Seagal's character in this movie. I think that this was by far his best performance. I know that a lot of people think that Under Siege was Steven Seagal's best movie and his best performance, but I actually disagree. I like this movie more. I think that Steven Seagal in this movie was more believable. There was a lot more charisma in this movie. There's some funny one-liners, which I won't spoil, but I thought he did a great job in this movie. And I think that the action set pieces in this movie, it's just a perfect example of how to do an action movie. It was brilliant. It was perfect. So I love this movie a lot. If I was to give this movie a final rating, I have to take into consideration that I gave Brawl in Cell Block 99 an 8 out of 10. I believe it was an 8 out of 10 anyway, and the reason why I didn't give it a higher score was because of, just the villains in the movie weren't really that memorable. And I think that an action movie, in order for it to be a real enjoyable flick and to get the most out of it, you have to have a bit more character development on the villains. So, you know, I would give this movie a 9 out of 10. Solid 9 out of 10. One of the best action movies of all time. Um, you know, I've spoken in a couple of my reviews how, you know, popular, well-known critics, like the critics on Rotten Tomatoes and whatnot, the featured critics, you know, they tend to give movies, you know, high scores based on things other than how good the movie actually was, you know, things like how much money they're being paid, you know, shit like that. This movie only has a 23% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and that is just, I don't even know what to say. I shake my head at that. That's ridiculous. Okay, there are action movies out there which are nowhere near, not even half as good as this, that have well over 70%. So, yeah, I mean, the movie Machete, which has Steven Seagal as the villain, that was an okay movie, but it wasn't nearly as good as this. So, and they gave that movie something like 72%. So, you know, a lot of these online popular critics are just ridiculous, in my opinion. This is a great movie, and I love it. 9 out of 10, solid movie. Um, Let me know, to my regular subscribers and to anybody who's new to this channel, let me know if you'd like to see more retro movie reviews. Because I know a few of you have said that you like my movie reviews, because all my reviews I've done recently have been recent movies. But I just, for now, you know, because I've seen a lot of movies from the 80s, a lot of movies from the 90s, which I love. And I just think that movies in the past were a lot better than a lot of the movies from nowadays. And so I would like to, every now and then, I would like to talk about some older movies and just do, you know, a few retro reviews and see how some new movies stack up. Like I talked about, and I keep mentioning this in this video, I talked about Brolin Cellblock 99, which has become one of my favourite action movies in recent years. I would compare it to a movie like this because I think both of those movies, they just, to me, they present how you should make an action movie. You know, don't use CGI, don't use all these cheap shaky cam, you know, close-up angles and all that shit. You know, let's actually see what's going on. Let's get a fun, well-directed, well-choreographed action flick, and that's exactly what this movie is. So, solid 9 out of 10, great movie, one of the best action movies of all time. Let me know what you guys think about it, and thanks for watching.